The call came at 3:12 in the morning on a Tuesday that tasted like rust and bad decisions. Cole Hargrove was 3 whiskeys deep in a Nashville dive bar called the Rusty Spur when his phone lit up with a Memphis area code he didn't recognize. The jukebox was bleeding Waylon Jennings into air thick with cigarette smoke and the despair of men who'd run out of better places to be. Cole almost didn't answer, almost let it ring through to voicemail while the ice melted in his glass and the night dissolved around him the way nights did when you'd spent enough years trying to outrun yourself. Almost. But the call came a second time, then a third, and men like Cole Hargrove men, carrying the weight of promises buried alongside the people they'd made them to. They learned a long time ago that calls at 3 in the morning never arrived with good news. They arrived like collection notices for debts you'd spent years pretending you didn't owe. He answered on the fourth ring. Hargrove. His voice came out rougher than intended gravel and exhaustion ground together by years of whiskey and bad sleep, and the loneliness that came from choosing isolation over the alternative. The woman on the other end sounded young. Too young. Her voice carried the tremor of someone who'd been crying for hours or was about to start. Mr. Hargrove, my name is Ren Voss. I'm a caseworker with Tennessee Child Protective Services. I'm calling about Lily Holloway. The whiskey in Cole's gut turned to battery acid. He hadn't heard that name in 7 years. Not since the United States Marine Corps shipped Marcus Holloway home in a flag-draped casket from a stretch of Iraqi desert outside Fallujah, where 3 good men had walked into an ambush that should never have happened. Not since Cole had stood at a Nashville cemetery in his dress blues, the fabric pulling tight across shoulders that had carried too much watching them. Lower his best friend into Tennessee clay, while a widow wept and a baby girl who would never remember her father screamed against her grandmother's chest. 7 years of silence. 7 years of whiskey and open roads and the cowardice of a man who knew what he owed and chose not to pay. What about her? Cole's voice dropped an octave. The bar disappeared. Waylon faded. All he could hear was his own pulse. Ren Voss took a shaking breath. She's at Leon Children's Hospital in Memphis, Mr. Hargrove. Room 312. She was admitted 4 hours ago. She has 47 cigarette burns across her upper back and shoulders. 3 broken ribs on her left side. A compound fracture of her left arm. The doctors say the injuries are consistent with prolonged systematic abuse over the past 6 months. Maybe longer. Cole's hand tightened around the phone until the plastic groaned. She's 4 years old, Ren continued, and her voice cracked down the middle like wood splitting. She stopped speaking 18 months ago, hasn't said a single word since her mother died. And Mr. Hargrove, the man who brought her in, the man who told the emergency room doctors she fell down the stairs, he's standing outside her room right now with his hand resting on his service weapon and a court order giving him legal guardianship. Hospital security won't touch him because he's law enforcement. CPS won't move against him because his paperwork is legitimate. Who? Cole's voice came out barely above a whisper. Deputy Brett Carver, Memphis Police Department. He's been Lily's legal guardian since her mother died. The bar stool scraped against linoleum as Cole stood. The sound cut through the noise of the room like a blade finding bone. I'm on my way. Mr. Hargrove, I don't know what you think you can do against a sworn officer with a valid court order. I made a promise. Cole's voice came out flat and final the way it had sounded in the seconds before men started dying in places far from home. Marcus Holloway was my brother. We served 3 tours together. Before his last deployment, he asked me to watch over his family if he didn't come home. He didn't come home. A silence on the line. Then that was 7 years ago. Yeah. Cole was already moving toward the door. It was. He hung up before she could respond. Outside Nashville was cold and dark, the kind of February night that got under your skin and stayed there. Cole's Harley sat alone in the parking lot chrome, catching the orange glow of a street lamp patient, and waiting the way machines were patient in a way humans couldn't manage. He swung his leg over the seat and sat for a moment with his hands resting on the tank, not moving. 47 cigarette burns. He'd carried a lot of things in his life. The weight of men he couldn't save. The dead weight of a marriage that had dissolved because he couldn't figure out how to be a husband when he was still trying to figure out how to be a person. The grinding exhaustion of PTSD that had its fingers in everything, the nightmares and the hypervigilance and the way certain sounds sent him back to places he'd spent years trying to leave. But the weight that settled onto him now was different. It was older, heavier, the crushing pressure of a debt come due. Watch over my girl's brother. If I don't come home, I promise. He'd said it in a forward operating base outside Fallujah with Marcus's blood drying on his hands and the sound of helicopters overhead, and the absolute certainty that both of them would survive because men like them didn't die in places like that. And then Marcus had died in a place exactly like that, and Cole had buried him and flown home and proceeded to spend 7 years making sure the promise he'd made meant as little as possible. He started the engine. The Harley roared to life beneath him like something that had been holding its breath, and Cole pulled out of the Rusty Spurs parking lot and pointed himself toward Memphis with the throttle open and the cold February air hammering his face like judgment he couldn't outrun. He rode at 90 miles an hour through the dark Tennessee night rain, beginning to fall somewhere around the halfway point fat drops that hit his face like accusations he'd earned. He didn't call ahead, didn't check routes, just rode with his jaw set and Marcus's voice looping in his skull on a track he couldn't silence. Watch over my girls. Lily had been a newborn the last time Cole had seen her. A screaming, red-faced creature in a pink blanket who had grabbed his finger with a grip that surprised him, tiny and absolute, the grip of someone who had already decided the world owed her something. He'd held her for exactly 4 minutes in the hospital before Marcus had taken her back with the instinctive possessiveness of a new father who couldn't quite believe what he'd made. She had Marcus's eyes even then, the same shade of gray-green, the same quality of attention, like she was already cataloging the world, filing everything away for later use. Cole had never gone back. After the funeral, he'd told himself he would call, would check in, would make sure Diane Holloway and her daughter were managing. He'd told himself that for 7 years while he did other things instead. Rode, drank, worked on engines that needed fixing because engines didn't ask questions and didn't look at you with the eyes of a dead man you'd failed. The rain intensified as Memphis appeared on the horizon, the city rising out of the darkness like a monument to all the ways things could go wrong. 11 stories of glass and concrete lit against the pre-dawn sky. Cole parked in the emergency lot and sat on his bike for a moment in the rainwater running down his face and soaking through his jacket, watching the hospital like it might tell him something useful. It didn't. He went inside. The emergency entrance smelled like antiseptic and the fear that lived in hospitals, the fear of people sitting in plastic chairs waiting to find out whether the people they loved were going to be okay. Cole dripped water across the polished tile floor as he walked to the elevator bank, and the night shift nurse at the front desk looked up at him and reached for her phone. He was 6'2" and 220 pounds of scarred muscle wrapped in a soaking wet leather jacket with a steel rider's patch across the back, and he knew exactly what he looked like. He'd spent enough years being exactly what he looked like that he'd stopped apologizing for it somewhere around year 3. "4th floor," he said before she could dial. "Room 312. Sir, visiting hours don't begin until..." He stepped past her toward the elevators. She didn't try to stop him. People rarely did. The elevator ride felt like the longest 30 seconds of his life. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The car smelled like antiseptic and old fear. Somewhere on another floor, a child was crying, the sound carrying through the walls with the quality of pain that didn't know yet it was supposed to be quiet. Cole stood in the elevator and thought about 47 cigarette burns and what kind of man burned a 4-year-old child with cigarettes and then carried her to the emergency room and told doctors she fell down the stairs. The kind of man who knew the system would protect him. The 4th floor hallway stretched before him like something from a bad dream. Pale green walls, harsh overhead lighting that made everyone look sick. The smell of bleach failing to cover the scent of everything bleach couldn't touch. At the far end of the corridor, outside a door marked 312, a man in a deputy's uniform sat in a plastic chair with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Late 30s, clean-shaved, the face of a man people instinctively trusted until the moment they had reason not to. His right hand rested near his service weapon with the casual precision of someone who'd practiced the gesture until it looked entirely natural. Brett Carver looked up as Cole approached. His eyes were flat and intelligent, the eyes of a predator assessing another predator. He stood slowly as Cole got within 10 feet. Restricted area. His voice carried the smooth authority of someone accustomed to obedience. Family only. Cole stopped. He looked at Brett Carver for a long moment, taking inventory. The posture, the practiced confidence, the hand near the weapon. I'm family. Cole's voice came out quiet, controlled. Brett's smile didn't touch his eyes. Lily doesn't have any family except me. I'm her legal guardian. You're a child abuser hiding behind a badge. Cole's voice stayed quiet. Real danger didn't need volume. And I'm the man who's going to make sure you never touch that little girl again. Brett stood fully. His hand moved to his weapon, not drawing it, just resting there. A reminder and a threat compressed into a single gesture. You threatening a law enforcement officer? Making a promise, Cole said. There's a difference. They stood in the fluorescent corridor like two different species, recognizing each other for what they were. Behind Brett, two nurses had stopped their work to watch. Security cameras blinked red in the corners. And somewhere in room 3, 1-2 Lily Holloway lay in a hospital bed that was too big for her, breathing the shallow breaths of a child who had learned that making herself small was the best way to survive. Then the elevator at the far end of the hallway opened. The first men who stepped out wore leather jackets that had survived weather and violence and years of open road. Their faces carried damage you couldn't fake, the kind earned through deployments and bar fights, and the slow grind of lives lived without softness. They moved with the unhurried certainty of men who had nothing left to prove. They didn't speak. They just formed a line across the hallway between Brett and everything behind him. Cole hadn't taken his eyes off Brett. The elevator opened again. More men stepped out. Then more. Then the stairwell doors at either end of the hallway pushed open, and men came through, those two leather and denim and ink, and the silence that came from men who'd been in enough rooms where silence preceded catastrophic violence. Cole had made 3 phone calls on the ride to Memphis. 3 calls to men who'd served with Marcus or served beside men who had. 3 calls that had traveled through a network built on loyalty and grief and the brotherhood of people who'd watched the best versions of themselves get left behind in sandy places far from home. The word had traveled faster than he had. Brett Carver's hand tightened on his weapon. His eyes moved across the corridor, and for the first time something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not quite, but the recalibration of a man who had built his entire sense of safety on a system that was suddenly visibly not enough. What the hell is this? Brett's voice had lost its authority. Now it just sounded like a question. Cole finally turned back to look at him. You said I was alone, Cole said. I made some calls. He turned away from Brett without waiting for a response and walked to the door of room 312 and pushed it open. The room was dim. The glow of monitors provided the only real light, supplemented by the gray pre-dawn pressing against rain-streaked windows. The room smelled like antiseptic in the sweetness of children's medicine, and underneath both of those things, something that made Cole's chest tighten in a way he couldn't name. Lily lay in a hospital bed that swallowed her completely. Her left arm was wrapped and splinted, elevated on a foam wedge. Her small body was wrapped in bandages that didn't hide what had been done to her, just covered it the way people covered things they couldn't look at directly. An IV line ran into the back of her right hand, taped down with medical tape printed with cartoon animals that seemed obscene given the circumstances. A heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm, the only clock in the room. She looked impossibly small, the kind of small that made the world seem fundamentally disordered, the kind that made you understand in your bones that some things were not supposed to happen. Cole approached the bed slowly, his boots silent on the tile. He didn't know what he was going to say. There weren't words for a failure this size. There wasn't language adequate to the distance between the promise he'd made and the room he was standing in. He pulled the plastic chair close to the bed and sat down so his face was level with hers. He didn't speak, just sat there in the dim room and looked at her. Then Lily's eyes opened. They were Marcus's eyes. Exactly Marcus's eyes, the same shade of gray-green, the same quality of attention, the same intelligence burning behind them that had always made Marcus seem older than his years. When she looked at Cole, really looked at him, something moved in her expression. Something that wasn't fear. Something that lived in a different place from fear entirely, some deeper register where the body remembered things the mind was still working out. He looked like a stranger. He knew that. Scarred face, leather jacket, the Iron Cross pendant his mother had given him hanging at his throat. He looked like exactly the kind of man children were taught to be afraid of. But Lily Holloway didn't look afraid. "Hey, little darling." Cole's voice came out rougher than he intended. The emotion he'd been keeping behind his teeth was pushing hard against the door. "My name is Cole. I knew your daddy. We served together in the Marines. He was my best friend in the world, and he asked me a long time ago to watch over you if he couldn't do it himself." Lily stared at him. She didn't speak. She'd stopped speaking 18 months ago, Wren had said. After her mother died. After whatever had happened in those days and weeks that followed had taught her that words cost more than they were worth. "I know you've been hurt," Cole continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're scared. And I know I'm a stranger. But I need you to understand something, Lily. I made your daddy a promise, and I should have kept it a long time ago. I'm sorry it took me this long to get here." The last sentence cracked in the middle. He stopped talking before it could get worse. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and laid his hand gently on the bed rail near hers. Not touching, just close, just available. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "Whatever happens after tonight, you are not alone." For a long moment, nothing. The heart monitor kept its steady count. Rain pressed against the windows. In the hallway, the low murmur of men talking carefully, the creak of leather, the sound of boots on tile. Then Lily's fingers moved, slowly, like something that had learned to be careful with trust. Her hand crossed the few inches of white blanket between them and wrapped around Cole's scarred knuckles. Her grip was small and precise and absolute. The grip of someone who had already decided the world owed her something and was going to hold on until it paid. It was Marcus's grip. Cole had to press his teeth together hard to keep his face from doing what it wanted to do. The door opened behind him. He turned to see a man filling the frame, 6'4" and built like something assembled from old wars and bad decisions. One eye covered by a patch, the other carrying a lifetime of things witnessed and survived. His jacket bore steel rider's patches worn soft from years of use. Cole knew him as Reaper. Had ridden with him for 6 years, had sat beside him in a VA waiting room once, and never talked about it, but understood something between them that didn't need words. Reaper looked at Lily. His face did something complicated, the hard man encountering something that cut through every layer of armor he'd built. "Hey, little warrior," he said, his voice surprising both of them with its gentleness. "I'm Reaper. Stupid name, I know, but it's what I got. Your dad and me, we crossed paths a time or two. He was a good man. One of the best I knew." Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then her grip on Cole's hand loosened slightly. Not releasing, just adjusting. Making room for the possibility that there might be more than one safe thing in the room. The hallway erupted behind them. Cole heard it before he understood it. Raised voices. Brett Carver's authority getting tested and finding itself insufficient. The low collective response of over 100 men who had collectively decided that authority of that particular kind no longer applied to the situation. Sergeant Marcus Webb of the Memphis Police Department arrived on the 4th floor at 5:15 in the morning with his jaw set and the look of a man pulled from sleep by a phone call that had ruined what remained of his night. He was gray at the temples and built like someone who had once been formidable and was still operating on that assumption. He took in the corridor, the wall of bikers, Brett Carver backed against the door of room 312, with his weapon hand tight and his face doing something complicated, and his expression went carefully blank in the way of a man who had spent enough years in law enforcement to recognize when a situation had already escaped containment. He identified Cole by process of elimination. Cole was the one standing slightly apart, the one the others oriented toward without quite looking at him, the unmistakable posture of a man who had called this gathering and was now responsible for what it meant. "You the one who organized this," Webb said. "I'm the one who made a promise to a dead Marine," Cole said. "These people came because they wanted to." Webb looked at the line of bikers, then at Brett, then at the door of room 312. Something moved through his expression that might have been calculation, or might have been the exhaustion of a cop who had seen too many situations like this one and knew exactly where they ended. He pulled Cole aside, far enough for conversation, but not far enough to leave the scene. "You're creating a federal situation here," Webb said quietly. "Hospital administration wants you arrested. Brett's threatening harassment charges. And my captain is 10 minutes from calling in support units to clear this floor. Let them try." The words came from behind Webb, low and deliberate, and he turned to find a man in his early 60s with a white beard that fell to his chest and eyes like river stones standing at the front of the line with the stillness of someone who had never needed to make himself look dangerous because he simply was. "We're veterans," the man said. His name among the Brotherhood was Prophet, and he had earned it the way men earned names that stuck by being right more often than made people comfortable. Marines, Army, Navy, men who served with Marcus Holloway or served beside men who did. "We're here because one of ours asked us to protect his daughter." "That's not a crime, Sergeant." Webb looked at him for a long moment. "You got a name, they call me Prophet." Webb's jaw worked. He looked back at Cole. "Best I can do right now is ask Brett to wait downstairs and post 2 officers outside the room. That's what the law allows me. The law put that little girl in Brett Carver's hands in the first place." Webb had no answer for that. His eyes went to the door of room 312 and stayed there for a moment that stretched long enough to mean something. Then he turned and walked to Brett Carver and said something in a low, flat voice that brooked no argument. And after a brief visible struggle with his own fury and pride, Brett walked to the elevator and stepped inside. The doors closed. The bikers in the hallway didn't move, didn't speak, just remained in their positions, patient and immovable. A wall of leather and ink and the gravity of men who had made a collective decision and weren't going to unmake it. Cole went back inside room 312. Lily was still awake, watching the door with those gray-green eyes that held the watchfulness of a child who had learned the world changed without warning, and usually for the worse. When Cole sat back down beside her, her hand found his again immediately. The same small, absolute grip. He stayed there. Outside, Memphis was beginning to lighten the sky, shifting from black to the dark gray that preceded dawn, the city's edges becoming visible against the retreating night. Rain continued to fall softly now, the violence of the earlier storm giving way to something more patient. Reaper stood at the window watching the parking lot below where Harleys were lined up in the rain like iron soldiers waiting for orders. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the room didn't already know. Cole sat beside Lily's bed and held her hand and listened to the heart monitor count out her heartbeat, steady and persistent, the sound of a small life that had survived what shouldn't have been survivable. He thought about the drive from Nashville, the way Marcus's voice had followed him through the dark and the rain, the guilt that had lived in his chest for 7 years like a coal that never went completely cold. "Watch over my girls, brother." Cole had been carrying that promise for 7 years like a stone in his pocket, something he knew was there and chose not to look at. And now he was sitting in a hospital room in Memphis, holding the hand of a 4-year-old girl with her dead father's eyes, and the promise didn't feel like a stone anymore. It felt like a door he just walked through. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number, Memphis area code, but not the same exchange as Ren Voss. Cole looked at the screen for a moment, then looked at Lily and stepped quietly out into the hallway, pulling the door most of the way closed behind him. He answered without speaking. The voice on the other end was male-controlled, stripped of everything that might identify it. Not Brett Carver. Someone else. someone operating at a different altitude entirely. You made a mistake coming to Memphis, the voice said. The girl belongs with her legal guardian. You're interfering with a sworn officer in the execution of his legal rights. That's a felony, Mr. Hargrove. Several felonies depending on how the DA decides to count. Cole didn't respond. I'm giving you an opportunity that most people in your position don't receive. The voice continued. Take your friends and leave Memphis. Forget about Lily Holloway. She's not your problem. She never was. She's the daughter of a Marine who died serving this country, Cole said. That makes her everyone's problem. A brief silence. The quality of silence that came before something changed. You don't understand what you're walking into. The voice carried the calm of a man who had never personally faced consequences. Brett has friends, people with significant resources and absolutely no interest in having their situation complicated by an idealistic biker with a dead friend's guilt on his conscience. You have 12 hours to clear out of Memphis. After that, we stop asking politely. Is that a threat? It's a promise, the voice said, the word landing with deliberate weight. You have until dawn. After that, whatever happens is your responsibility. The line went dead. Cole stood in the hallway among the bikers who had ridden through the night to stand in a hospital corridor for a little girl they'd never met, and he looked at the closed door of room 312, and he felt the weight of what was coming settle onto him with the finality of something that couldn't be put back down. Whoever was on that phone wasn't Brett Carver. Brett Carver was a weapon. This was the hand that held it. And Cole had just announced with considerable clarity exactly which side of this he was on. Profit materialized at his shoulder noiseless, and certain the way old men became when they'd spent enough decades paying attention to the world. He looked at Cole's face and read it accurately. Trouble, someone just offered me 12 hours to leave, Cole said, politely. Profit's expression didn't change. How politely, the kind of polite that comes right before the other kind. Profit was quiet for a moment. Then we knew this wouldn't stay simple. Simple ended when you walk through those doors. The question now is how complicated it gets before it gets better. Cole looked at him. You think it gets better? Profit's eyes went to the door of room 312. His expression carried the weight of a man who had seen enough of the world to know that better was not guaranteed but was possible. Sometimes, when the right people decided it was worth paying for. I think that little girl in there woke up this morning believing she was alone in the world, Profit said. And right now she knows she isn't. Whether it gets better depends on what we do with the hours between now and when this comes to a head. Cole looked at the door. Through the small gap he'd left it open, he could see Lily. Still awake, still watching the door. Her right hand, the one without the IV, resting on the blanket. Waiting. He pushed the door open and went back inside. He sat down in the plastic chair and took her hand again, and she gripped it with the same immediate certainty as before. And Cole Hargrove, 42 years old, scarred veteran, failed husband, man who had spent 7 years running from the weight of this moment, looked at the daughter of Marcus Holloway and understood that the running was over. Whatever came next, he was staying. 12 hours, maybe less. He looked at Lily's face, peaceful now, in a way it hadn't been when he arrived, still watchful, but less braced against the world. And he thought about the voice on the phone and the specific calm of it and the way it had known exactly which button to push. Guilt, fear, the suggestion that this was a battle too large for one man with too much conscience and insufficient resources. The voice was right about one thing. Cole didn't understand the full shape of what he'd walked into. Not yet. But dawn was coming, and in room 312, Lily Holloway's fingers were wrapped around his hand like a rope she'd thrown to herself. He wasn't going anywhere. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, Memphis gray and quiet in the last hour before sunrise. The Harleys sat in the parking lot below, patient and gleaming and ready. And in the hallways of Lion Children's Hospital, 112 men who had chosen loyalty over comfort and a promise over safety stood their ground in the silence of people who had already made up their minds. The first call to Cole's phone had started something that couldn't be unstarted. The second call had told him exactly how serious it was going to get. And somewhere in the building, Brett Carver was already making calls of his own. The morning came in gray and cold, the kind of February light that didn't warm anything, just made the darkness visible by degrees. Cole hadn't slept. He'd sat in the plastic chair beside Lily's bed through the remaining hours of the night, his hand available whenever she reached for it, which she did every time she startled awake from the shallow, fractured sleep of a child whose nervous system had learned that rest was dangerous. Each time she woke, her hand would find his in the dark with practiced precision, and each time he would say nothing. Just let his hand be there, solid and unmoving, until her breathing slowed again. By 6 in the morning, she was sleeping more steadily, exhaustion finally winning over fear. Cole sat in the dim room and listened to the heart monitor count out her pulse and thought about the voice on the phone and what it meant that someone that controlled had felt the need to call at all. Reaper stood at the window, watching the parking lot, watching the street. He hadn't spoken in 2 hours. He didn't need to. At 7:15, Ren Voss came through the door. She looked worse than she'd sounded on the phone, which was saying something. Mid-20s dark circles carved deep under her eyes. Her CPS badge clipped to a blazer she'd clearly slept in or hadn't slept in at all. She carried a folder against her chest like a shield, and her expression cycled through exhaustion and fury, and something that might have been relief at finding Cole still there. She stopped when she saw Lily sleeping. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to control. "She's been asking for you," Ren said quietly. In her own way, "She keeps looking at the door." Cole stood carefully, making sure not to disturb Lily's hand where it rested near his. He moved to the corner of the room where they could speak without waking her. "You said on the phone that Brett Carver has legitimate paperwork," Cole said. "How legitimate?" "Court-ordered guardianship filed 8 months ago," Ren said. "The judge who signed it was presented with documentation of Diane Holloway's death and evidence that no other suitable family members were available for placement." She looked at Cole. The grandmother was still alive when that order was filed. The filing claimed she was medically incapacitated. She wasn't. She'd broken her hip 3 months earlier. She was recovering. Slowly, but she was recovering. Ren's jaw tightened. The medical documentation submitted to the court overstated her condition significantly, enough to justify awarding guardianship to the boyfriend of the deceased mother. "Who prepared the documentation?" Ren looked at him steadily. "The physician who signed off on it retired 4 months ago, moved out of state. No forwarding address on file." Cole absorbed this, the efficiency of it, the way each piece had been placed carefully, the kind of careful that took time and resources, and the confidence that no one was going to look too hard. "What happened to the grandmother?" Cole said. "She fell," Ren said, "down the stairs of her home. 9 months ago. She died of complications 3 days later." Cole waited. Ren's hands tightened on the folder. She'd told her neighbor 2 weeks before that fall that she was worried about Brett Carver. She'd used the word dangerous. She said she was planning to go to someone about it. Was there an investigation? There was a report. Ren's voice was careful and precise, the voice of a woman who had spent years learning to say true things in language that couldn't be challenged. The investigating officer closed the case as accidental within 48 hours. That officer was Brett Carver's former partner. They'd worked together for 6 years. Cole looked at the window. Outside, Memphis was doing its morning business, indifferent and ordinary traffic beginning to build on the street below the city, running on its familiar tracks without any awareness that a 4-year-old girl in a room on the 4th floor of this building was the center of a gravity that was about to pull everything toward it. "I need to tell you something," Ren said. Her voice had changed, lower now. Something in it she was visibly working to control. Cole looked at her. "I received a call this morning from my supervisor." She stopped. The effort of the next sentence was considerable. "I'm being suspended pending investigation. Inappropriate disclosure of confidential information to an unlicensed third party. Conduct prejudicial to an ongoing custody matter." Cole went very still. "They're saying I violated protocol by calling you last night, by sharing details of Lily's case. They're opening a formal review, and until it's resolved, I'm suspended without pay and prohibited from accessing any CPS files or making any official contact regarding Lily's placement. Who filed the complaint? She looked at him. Who do you think? When did the complaint come in? Cole already knew before she answered. The call to his phone at 5:30 this morning. The 12-hour warning. Whoever was running Brett Carver had moved immediately. Not 12 hours. Minutes. Filed at 5:47 this morning, Wren said. My supervisor received it at 6. I was called at 6:15. She lifted the folder slightly. I came here first. Cole looked at the folder. This is everything I have, Wren said. Lily's complete medical file, incident reports, my own case notes from the past 6 weeks, including my documented concerns about Brett Carver that were reviewed and dismissed 3 times by my supervisor. She paused. The file also contains the accident report from Diane Holloway's car accident 18 months ago, including a notation from the mechanic who examined the vehicle that the brake failure was, and I'm quoting, inconsistent with mechanical wear and consistent with deliberate interference. Was that notation acted on? It was reviewed by the lead investigator on the accident. Who was? Brett Carver's supervisor, Wren said, who at that time was the commanding officer of the Memphis PD Traffic Division. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Wren Voss suspended CPS worker with a folder full of documentation she wasn't supposed to have anymore, standing in a hospital room at 7 in the morning, after a night she hadn't slept through, handing him the only weapon she had left. You can't be part of whatever happens next, Cole said. They'll use it against you. I know. Wren set the folder on the table beside Lily's bed. I was never here. I don't know how that got there. She looked at Lily one more time. The sleeping child, the bandaged arm, the fragility of a small body that had been asked to absorb too much. Her expression was the expression of someone who had chosen this work because they believed it mattered and was finding out today exactly what it cost. She walked out without another word. Cole picked up the folder. He read for 20 minutes standing in the corner of the room while Lily slept, and Reaper watched the window and the heart monitor kept its steady count. He read carefully the way you read things that mattered not for speed, but for completeness, making sure he understood not just what was there, but what the shape of it meant. When he finished, he closed the folder and set it down and stood very still for a moment. Then Prophet was in the doorway. He read Cole's face with the accuracy of a man who had spent 60 years paying attention. Hallway Prophet said. They stood 10 feet from the door, far enough for conversation, close enough that Cole could still see through the gap to Lily's sleeping form. Brett Carver didn't act alone, Cole said. Prophet nodded once, the nod of a man confirming something he already knew. Cole looked at him. You already knew. Prophet was quiet for a moment. Then I've been making calls since 4 this morning. People who know Memphis, who know the department, who've been watching things here for a while. He paused. There's a man named Douglas Hale, captain of the organized crime unit. 14 years on the force. Commendations the full package. He also runs the division that handled every major asset seizure in Memphis PD for the past 5 years. Cole waited. Over that 5-year period, Prophet said Memphis PD seized approximately $8 million in cash and assets from criminal enterprises operating in the city. The official records account for $4 million of that. The other $4 million is gone, distributed across accounts and arrangements that don't appear in any official documentation, laundered through processes that took someone with sophisticated financial knowledge to construct. Someone like a forensic accountant, Cole said. Prophet looked at him. Diane Holloway had been tracking the discrepancy for 6 months before she died. She'd compiled documentation. She had a meeting scheduled with the FBI field office in Nashville 2 days after her car accident. The folder, Cole said. Wren's file mentions the brake line report. Diane must have known they were on to her, Prophet said. Or she suspected. She was careful, but not careful enough or not fast enough, and Hale had resources she didn't. Cole looked at the door of room 312 at the small shape under the blankets, at the IV line and the bandages and the cartoon tape that held it all in place. And Lily Cole said, Brett Talk Prophet said, that's the thing about men like Carver. They need someone to know, need to feel the weight of what they can do. He had a 4-year-old girl in his house who couldn't tell anyone what she heard, or so he thought. Children that age aren't supposed to retain conversation, aren't supposed to understand what they're hearing. He said things in front of her he'd never have said in front of an adult. Prophet's voice was flat and precise. She heard things, specific things, about her mother, about her grandmother, about Hale and what his role was. Things that a 4-year-old child held in memory the way children held what frightened them most completely and without revision. She's the only witness, Cole said, to all of it. Prophet met his eyes. Hale doesn't just want her back because Brett has a court order. He wants her back because she's the thread that unravels everything he spent 5 years building. And she's 4 years old and hasn't spoken in 18 months and has no advocate left in any official capacity, and he knows it. The weight of it was extraordinary. Cole stood in the hospital hallway and felt the full architecture of what had been built around this child. The court order, the suspended caseworker, the closed investigations, the retired doctor, the dead grandmother. Every exit sealed before anyone thought to look for them. Then the elevator at the end of the hallway opened and Brett Carver walked out. He wasn't in uniform. He'd changed into civilian clothes, dark jacket jeans, boots made for a specific purpose. In his right hand, he held a folded document, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had made a decision and was now executing it, the blankness of someone who had moved past doubt into action. He walked toward room 312 without looking at the bikers lining the walls, without acknowledgement, with the focused momentum of someone who understood that hesitation was the enemy. Cole stepped into the hallway to meet him. Brett stopped 10 feet away. He held up the document. Emergency custody transfer, Brett said. Signed this morning by Judge Alderton, effective immediately. I'm moving Lily to a private medical facility where she can receive appropriate care without criminal interference. You need to step aside. Cole looked at the document. Didn't take it. The facility, Cole said. What facility? A private care center approved by the court. Brett's voice was controlled, smooth, rehearsed. Lily will receive excellent medical attention in a secure environment away from the individuals who have been traumatizing her with this situation. The individuals who have been traumatizing her, Cole repeated. Brett's expression didn't change. You've created a hostile environment in this hospital. You've surrounded a traumatized child with aggressive strangers. You've interfered with my legal rights as her guardian. He took a step forward. I'm giving you the opportunity to stand down before this escalates to additional charges. You're already looking at criminal trespass and obstruction. Don't make it worse. Cole didn't move. The hallway was absolutely silent. 112 men in leather jackets and boots watched without speaking, without moving their attention, so complete it had physical weight and temperature. Brett's hand moved toward his waistband. Reaper's voice came through the door of room 312, like something quarried rather than spoken. You pull that weapon in a pediatric ward, and I will end your career in ways that have nothing to do with a badge. Brett went still. His eyes moved to Reaper filling the doorway, then moved across the hallway to the bikers on either side, and something shifted in his calculation. The recalibration of a man who had arrived confident and was adjusting to information that changed everything. He lowered the document to his side. I'll be back in 2 hours, Brett said, with federal marshals and a warrant for your arrest. And when I leave here with Lily this time, you'll watch it happen from handcuffs. He turned and walked to the elevator. The bikers parted enough to let him through and no more. The elevator doors closed behind him and the hallway let out a collective breath that sounded like weather changing. Cole went back into room 312. Lily was awake. She'd pushed herself up on her good arm, her eyes wide, her small body rigid beneath the hospital gown. She'd heard Brett's voice. Her face carried the expression of a child who had learned that certain sounds meant the world was about to change for the worse. He's going to take me back, Lily said. Her voice was barely audible, the voice of a child who had spent 18 months relearning whether speaking was worth the cost. No, Cole said. He moved to her side and sat. He's not. He has the paper, the judge paper. She was shaking, fine tremors running through her small shoulders. The paper means he can. Cole looked at her. At the absolute certainty of her fear earned through months of experience that had taught her exactly how the world worked and who held power in it. Listen to me, Cole said. He kept his voice low and steady, the voice he'd used in Iraq when men needed to hear something true in the middle of chaos. That paper was signed by a judge who didn't know what Brett did to you, who didn't know what Brett did to your mother or your grandmother. When the right people find out the truth about Brett Carver and the man who's been protecting him, that paper won't be worth anything. What if they don't find out in time? Lily said. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "That's why we're not waiting." He looked at Reaper, then at Prophet, who had appeared in the doorway. "We need to move her," Cole said. "Now, before Brett comes back with marshals." Prophet stepped inside and pulled the door closed behind him. His expression was the expression of a man who had already been thinking this and had been waiting for Cole to arrive at the same conclusion. "If we do this," Prophet has said, "we're past the point of negotiation. Amber Alert. Federal kidnapping charges. Every law enforcement resource in Tennessee pointed directly at us. I know. You understand what that means for you specifically. You have no criminal record. After tonight, you will. I know." Prophet looked at him for a long moment, then at Lily, then back at Cole. He nodded once, the nod of a man who had made peace with a decision before it was fully formed. "I'll start making calls," Prophet said. "Get transportation ready. Figure out a route." Cole turned back to Lily. Her shaking had slowed slightly, the fine tremors easing as the immediate threat of Brett's presence faded. She was watching Cole with those gray-green eyes, reading his face with the attention of someone who had learned that faces told you more than words ever did. "Are we running away?" she said. "Yeah," Cole said. "We are." Lily was quiet for a moment. She looked at her bandaged arm, at the IV line, at the window where Memphis was going about its ordinary morning outside, indifferent and unhurried. "Daddy used to say," she said, and stopped. Cole waited. "He used to say that running was okay if you were running towards something." Lily's voice was very small. Instead of away from something, Cole felt something move through his chest that had no name he knew. "That sounds like him," Cole said. "What are we running toward?" Safety, Cole said. "And people who will make sure what happened to you doesn't get buried the way it's supposed to." He paused. "And after that, a home, if you want one." Lily looked at him for a long time. The heart monitor kept its count. Rain pressed against the windows. "Okay," she said. They moved fast. Reaper disconnected the IV with the careful hands of a man who had done more field medicine than he'd ever wanted to. He wrapped Lily's arm more securely, found a hospital blanket large enough to work as covering, and had her ready to travel in 4 minutes. Cole kept his hand available throughout, letting her dictate when she needed it and when she didn't, watching her face for the tightening that meant the pain was spiking. Prophet coordinated from the hallway, his voice low, moving bikers into position, some toward the elevators, some toward the stairwells, some staying in place to create the impression that nothing was changing. A black van was waiting at the loading dock in the basement. The driver was a woman from the Louisiana chapter whose name Cole didn't know, but whose eyes had the quality of someone who had decided the right thing and wasn't going to undecide it. They went down the service stairs, 8 of them and Lily moving through the institutional pale green corridors of the hospital's lower levels, while above them the 4th floor remained occupied and loud, the bikers maintaining their presence as distraction and misdirection. Lily didn't make a sound. She held Cole's hand and moved her feet when he moved his, navigating the stairs carefully on legs that were still steady despite everything, because she was 4 years old, and 4-year-olds were more resilient than the world deserved. The loading dock smelled like diesel and wet concrete. The van was running exhaust white in the cold morning air. Cole lifted Lily inside and climbed in after her, and then Reaper and 3 others, and the door slammed and the van moved. Through the tinted rear window, Cole watched the hospital recede. No sirens, no lights, just Memphis in the gray morning, ordinary and oblivious. Then Prophet's phone rang from the front seat. He answered, listened for 20 seconds, and his entire posture changed. Cole watched it happen. The shoulders, the jaw, the stillness of a man receiving news that confirmed something he'd hoped wouldn't be confirmed. How long ago, Prophet said. Then how many? He hung up and turned around. Brett didn't wait this 2 hours, Prophet said. His voice was stripped of everything except information. He hit the 4th floor 12 minutes after we left. Came with 16 Memphis PD, SWAT protocols, K9 units. Found the empty room and the brothers who stayed behind playing ignorant. He paused. The Amber Alert went out 8 minutes ago. Lily's photo is on every phone in Tennessee. They're calling it a kidnapping by armed extremists. Roadblocks going up on all major highways. State police are involved. FBI has been notified. Cole looked at Lily, sitting beside him, wrapped in a hospital blanket, watching his face. She had heard. She understood more than she was supposed to at 4 years old. Her expression hadn't broken toward panic, which was either the resilience of a child who had already survived the worst things or something that would cost her later when the cost came due. Cole looked at Prophet. How long before they find us? Prophet's expression gave him the answer before the words did. On the main roads, maybe 2 hours. If we stay on back routes and they get aerial assets up, considerably less. The van turned off the highway onto a road that narrowed quickly from paved to gravel trees, pressing close on both sides, branches, skeletal against the February sky. They drove for 30 minutes through terrain that grew progressively more isolated, the kind of rural Tennessee landscape that existed between places rather than being one itself. Then the road ahead dropped away. The driver stopped the van. Flash flooding, she said. Comes up fast on these back roads after rain. She got out to look. Prophet got out. Cole stayed with Lily, watching through the windshield as they assessed the situation by flashlight in the gray morning, the pale beams moving over dark, rushing water where the road used to be. Prophet came back to the window. East route is gone. West route puts us back on the main highway where the roadblocks will be. He looked at Cole. We need a third option, and I don't have one. The van was silent. Then Lily said, There's a house. Cole looked at her. She was looking through the passenger window into the trees, her eyes focused on something specific. Through the gap in the branches, barely visible a light. The kind that came from windows warm, in particular in the darkness, the light of somewhere inhabited. Cole looked at Prophet. No better options, Cole said. Prophet looked at the light through the trees for a moment, then nodded once. They left the van concealed in a stand of pines and went on foot. 8 adults and 1 child moving through wet undergrowth toward a light that might mean safety or might mean the end of whatever remained of their options. The house resolved slowly from the darkness. Small white clapboard siding gone gray with weather, a sagging porch, a truck in the driveway with rust claiming the wheel wells, smoke from the chimney, a light in the front window. Signs of ordinary life in a place far enough from everything that ordinary life had a quality of self-sufficiency. Cole went alone. He crossed the yard in the pre-dawn gray boots wet from the undergrowth and climbed the porch steps and knocked. The woman who opened the door was in her mid-60s, weathered in the way of people who had spent lives outdoors with gray hair and eyes that assessed situations quickly and accurately. She looked at Cole, at his jacket, at the exhaustion, and the rain, and whatever his face was doing that he couldn't fully control. Then she looked past him at Lily, who Cole was holding, and her expression changed completely. I saw the news, the woman said. Her name was Eugenia Pruitt, and she said it without being asked, the way people offered names when they decided to trust. I saw the live feed from the hospital, saw that little girl stand up and talk to that police captain. Cole waited. Eugenia Pruitt looked at Lily for a long moment with the attention of someone who had raised children and understood what a child who had been hurt looked like, and what a child who was being protected looked like, and was making a determination about which category applied here. "Come inside," she said. "Phone's in the kitchen." The safe house was a converted garage that Ironside had established as an emergency location 18 months earlier, the kind of precaution that organizations with long memories kept against contingencies. Cole hadn't known about it. That was the point. Information distributed on a need-to-know basis, resources positioned without full visibility to any single member. They reached it 2 hours after leaving Eugenia Pruitt's kitchen by a route that added 40 minutes but avoided every road where roadblocks were likely. Cole had noted the rotary phone on Eugenia's kitchen wall on the way through, filed it away the way soldiers filed anything that might matter later. 12 bikes were already parked in the clearing when the van arrived chrome dull in the rain. Ironside met them at the door. Cole had not seen him in 5 years. The steel-gray beard was longer, the lines in his face were deeper, but the eyes were the same eyes that held the quality of a man who had been paying for past choices long enough that the interest had become the principal. They stood in the doorway for a moment, two men with history between them that neither had ever adequately addressed. Marcus Ironside said finally. It was the whole sentence. "Yeah," Cole said. They went inside. The garage interior was concrete and harsh fluorescent light and the smell of oil and cold. Folding tables, mismatched chairs, a space heater losing the battle against February. 30 bikers in various positions of readiness, faces that ranged from exhausted to hard to something that sat between grief and fury. Cole settled Lily in the corner where someone had laid out blankets and a stuffed rabbit that looked new, bought for exactly this kind of contingency by someone who had thought further ahead than the crisis. Lily sat on the blanket and held the rabbit and watched the room with those gray-green eyes, cataloging it, the way she cataloged everything, assessing for threat and finding something less than threat, but not yet safety. Cole sat beside her. Ironside stood in the center of the room and waited until Cole looked up. "There are things you need to know," Ironside said. "Things we learned while you were making your decision in that hospital corridor." "Tell me." Ironside pulled a folder from the table. He set it down in front of Cole open. Inside, photocopied documents, spreadsheets, handwritten notes, and the careful script of a woman who had known she was building a case and had treated every notation as though it might matter in a courtroom someday. "We were contacted by Diane Holloway," Ironside said, 14 months ago, before she died. Cole went very still. She'd heard through back channels that the Steel Riders had people inside Memphis law enforcement. Informants. People who could verify what she was finding and help her get her documentation to federal investigators safely. She reached out. She had 6 months of evidence compiled. Names, dates, amounts, account numbers. Enough to put Douglas Hale and most of his operation in federal prison. Cole looked at the documents. Diane's handwriting in the margins precise and careful. The handwriting of someone who understood that every notation might matter. "What did you do?" Cole said. Ironside's jaw tightened. "We told her we needed 2 weeks to verify her claims. Make sure we weren't being set up. We asked for patience. She died 10 days later." The silence in the garage was the silence of 30 men who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been asked to set it down in a room with the person most entitled to see it. "You could have protected her," Cole said. "We moved too slow," Ironside said. His voice carried the flatness of a man who had stopped defending himself against something true. "We told ourselves we were being careful. We were being careful. It didn't matter." Cole looked at Lily. She was watching the room the rabbit held against her chest with her good arm. "And the grandmother." "We tried," Ironside said. "After Diane died, we tried to reach her. She wouldn't talk to us, said she didn't trust bikers, said she'd handle it through proper channels." He stopped. 9 months later, she fell down the stairs. Cole absorbed this. The weight of it was different from guilt, more structural, the weight of understanding exactly how a thing had been built, and by whom and what it had cost. "We're here now," Ironside said. "Every brother in this room is here because of Marcus Holloway and because of what we owe him. But I'm not going to pretend the debt started last night when you called." Cole looked at him for a long moment, at the eyes holding steady, neither seeking absolution nor flinching from the absence of it. Then the garage door exploded inward. Not slowly, not with warning. It came apart in a burst of sound and cold air and splinters of wood, the violence of a breach executed by people who had done it many times before. 5 men in tactical gear poured through the gap, weapons raised, moving in the practice formation of operators for whom this was professional rather than desperate. Nobody moved. The bikers froze, not from fear exactly, from the discipline of men who understood that a room full of weapons pointed in multiple directions required everyone to stop moving simultaneously. The lead operative's voice came through a modulator stripped of humanity. "Mr. Hargrove, you're under arrest for kidnapping, child endangerment, and interference with a law enforcement investigation. The child will be returned to her legal guardian immediately." Cole stood between the operatives and Lily without having made a conscious decision to do it. It simply happened the way certain things happened in the body before the mind caught up. Then a figure stepped through the shattered doorway. Douglas Hale was not wearing a uniform. He was wearing the clothes of a man who had done very well for himself, a good suit, shoes that cost more than a month of Cole's income, the appearance of someone who had never had to do his own dirty work. His face was the face of a man who appeared in community newsletters and department commendations, a face designed for public trust. His eyes were something else entirely. "This doesn't need to be difficult," Hale said. His voice was the voice Cole had heard on the phone at 5:30 in the morning, the calm of a man who had never personally faced consequences. "We want the girl. You hand her to us and we can have a conversation about what happens next for you." Cole said nothing. "She goes back to her legal guardian." Hale continued, "Brett Carver has legitimate court-ordered custody. What happens after that is a private family matter that has no bearing on your situation." The way he said private family matter with the neutrality of someone who had said similar things about similar situations and watched them disappear made something cold and absolute settle into Cole's chest. "She stays with me," Cole said. Hale's expression didn't change. "Mr. Hargrove, you are currently in violation of 4 federal statutes. You have no legal standing, no institutional protection, and no viable path out of this room that doesn't end with you in federal custody. The most rational thing you can do right now is step aside." Cole looked at him, at the operatives with their weapons raised, at the 30 bikers whose hands had moved with the careful non-movement of men keeping themselves from reaching for things. Then Lily's voice came from the corner of the room. "You told Brett to cut my mama's car." Every head turned. Lily was standing. She'd pushed herself upright on the blanket, her good arm taking all the weight, her face going white with the effort of it. She stood anyway, the stuffed rabbit hanging from her splinted hand, her gray-green eyes locked on Douglas Hale with an intensity that had no business belonging to a 4-year-old child. Her voice was small and absolutely steady. "Brett told me," she said. "He told me you helped him. He said you made the accident look right. He said you made sure nobody asked questions. He said that if I ever told anyone, you would make me disappear the same way you made my grandma disappear." Hale's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise. Then the look of a man recalculating something fundamental. Then the blankness of a decision made. "The child has been traumatized," Hale said. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She knows exactly what she's saying." The voice came from behind Cole, from Prophet, who had been standing near the back wall so quietly that the room had forgotten he was there. And he was holding his phone with the screen facing outward, and on the screen was a video feed, and at the bottom of the feed were numbers ticking upward. Viewers, climbing, already past 4,000 and moving fast. "This has been streaming for 11 minutes, Prophet said, to 47 news stations across Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi. Everything Captain Hale just said is on record. Everything Lily just said is on record. Every weapon currently pointed at civilians in this room is on record." The operatives looked at each other, then at Hale. Hale's face had gone through the blankness and come out the other side into something that was neither calm nor controlled. He looked at the phone, at the ticking numbers, at Cole. "You're bluffing," he said. Prophet turned the phone so Hale could see the screen fully. The interface, the connected feeds, the viewer count now past 7,000, and climbing as whatever algorithm governed these things recognized a live confrontation and pushed it toward more screens. Hale stood in the destroyed doorway of a garage in rural Tennessee and understood in the way that men who had always controlled information understood losing control of it, that something had just changed that couldn't be unchanged. He turned and walked out. The operatives lowered their weapons. They exchanged looks that communicated the professional assessment of men deciding that the calculus of this engagement had shifted beyond acceptable parameters. They followed Hale into the cold morning, and the sound of SUV doors and engines starting faded down the gravel road into the trees. The garage was silent. Then Lily's legs gave out. Cole caught her before she reached the floor, his arms around her before the motion completed, lifting her and holding her against his chest while she shook. Not crying, just shaking the tremors of a body that had spent everything it had on the past 3 minutes and had nothing left for the performance of composure. "I got you," Cole said. "I got you." She pressed her face against his jacket and breathed fast, and then slower still, the shaking easing gradually, the way adrenaline eased when the body finally believed the immediate danger had passed. The room began moving again around them, voices quiet and purposeful, Prophet still on his phone, Ironside at the door, watching the road, Reaper riding a chair that had been knocked over by the breach. "You did something incredibly brave," Cole said against the top of Lily's head. "What you just did. Your daddy would have been proud." She didn't respond for a long moment. Then against his jacket, "He got scared, right, Hale? He got scared when he saw the phone." Lily's voice was muffled but clear. "He tried not to show it, but he did." "Yeah," Cole said. "He did. Good." The word came out with a satisfaction that was, under the circumstances, entirely earned. But Prophet was already turning from his phone with an expression that ended the brief exhale of relief before it could fully form. Outside, the sound that had been distant was no longer distant. Multiple units, coming fast from more than one direction. Hale hadn't surrendered. He'd retreated to regroup, and he'd come back with everything he had left. Cole looked at Lily in his arms, at the garage around them with its concrete walls and its one compromise entrance, at the 30 bikers in the narrowing margin of options. He needed to make a phone call. He had 20 minutes, maybe less. Eugenia Pruitt's door opened before his second knock, which meant she'd been watching through the window, which meant she'd heard what had happened in the garage through the trees, and had been waiting to find out what came next. She looked at his face and stepped back without speaking and pointed at the kitchen. Cole crossed to the phone mounted on the wall, a rotary model that had been built when phones were made to last, and lifted the receiver and dialed from memory the number he'd looked up 3 hours ago on Prophet's phone, and committed to storage the way he committed to storage things that might be the only option left. FBI Nashville Field Office. The voice was professional and neutral, trained to receive information without revealing what it did with it. "My name is Cole Hargrove," Cole said. "I'm calling about the Amber Alert for Lily Holloway. I have her. She's safe and unharmed. I need to speak with whoever is running the investigation into Captain Douglas Hale of Memphis PD right now, not in 5 minutes, right now." A pause. The pause of procedure encountering urgency and deciding which one took precedence. "Sir, are you aware that you are currently the subject of a federal kidnapping warrant?" "I'm aware that Lily Holloway is a 4-year-old girl whose mother was murdered by a deputy working under Douglas Hale's command to cover up $4 million in stolen asset seizures. I'm aware that her grandmother was killed for the same reason. I'm aware that Douglas Hale just ordered armed contractors to execute civilians in a garage in rural Tennessee, and that the entire incident was broadcast live to 47 news outlets." Cole kept his voice level and stripped of everything except information. "I'm aware that I have a flash drive containing Diane Holloway's complete forensic documentation of Hale's operation, and that if Lily doesn't have federal protection in the next 15 minutes, none of that documentation matters, because Hale is coming back with enough firepower to make sure there's no one left to testify." Another pause. Longer. Then a different voice came on the line. Male, older, carrying the weight of someone who had been doing this long enough to know when something was real. "This is Special Agent Calloway Breck. Talk to me. Cole talked. He gave it in 90 seconds. Flat and sequential the way you reported in the field when time was the variable you had the least of. Diane Holloway, the forensic investigation, 6 months of documentation. The meeting with the FBI that never happened because the brake lines were cut 2 days before she could make it. The grandmother, the stairs, the neighbor's statement. Brett Carver and the court-ordered guardianship obtained through falsified medical documentation. Douglas Hale and the $4 million dollars, and the network inside Memphis PD that had been running interference for 5 years. Ren Voss and the suspended credentials. The live stream from the garage. Hale's direct order to kill civilians on camera. The flash drive from Ren's files. When he finished, there was a silence of 3 seconds that felt like considerably longer. "Where are you?" Breck said. Cole looked at Eugenia Pruitt standing in her kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her expression carrying the quality of a woman who had made her decision and was standing in it without apology. She gave him a nod. He gave Breck the address. "Do not leave that location," Breck said. "Do not allow anyone else to take custody of Lily. I'm dispatching a team now. ETA is 18 minutes. If Memphis PD arrives before we do, they do not have authority to take the child. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand," Cole said. "You mean hold the line?" "Yes, that is what I mean. What if Hale gets there first?" "Then you hold it anyway and make sure everything that happens is visible," Breck said. "Keep the cameras running. We'll be there." The line went dead. Cole hung up the rotary phone and stood in Eugenia Pruitt's kitchen for a moment, with his hand still on the receiver. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the warmth of a house lived in for decades accumulated ordinary life. The smell of meals cooked in winter survived, in mornings that had come even when they weren't welcome. "You're going back out there," Eugenia Pruitt said. "Yes, ma'am." She was quiet for a moment. Then she opened a cabinet above the stove and took down a thermos and filled it from the coffee maker on the counter without asking. She held it out to him. "You've got time for this," she said. 18 minutes is 18 minutes. Cole took the thermos. He looked at her, at the lined face and the steady eyes of a woman who had opened her door in the dark to a stranger carrying a hurt child because she had decided that doing nothing was its own kind of choice. "Thank you," he said. Eugenia Pruitt looked at him for a moment. Then that little girl spoke up when she didn't have to, when she was terrified and hurt and had every reason to stay quiet. She looked Hale in the eye and said the true thing. She paused. "You make sure she gets to grow up knowing that mattered." Cole walked back through the cold and the wet undergrowth toward the garage and the sound of sirens that were no longer distant. Prophet met him at the back door. His face gave Cole the update before words did. "How many?" Cole said. 30 confirmed, Prophet said. "Another vehicle just came up the north approach. Could be more. Hale's in the lead car. He's not in civilian clothes anymore." "How long?" 4 minutes, maybe 5. Cole looked at the room. Lily was in the corner where he'd left her. Reaper crouched beside her, his massive frame somehow making itself smaller in the way of people who understood that size could frighten as easily as it could protect. Lily was watching the door with those gray-green eyes and holding the stuffed rabbit, and Cole could see from across the room that she was afraid and that she was managing the fear with a discipline that 4-year-olds were not supposed to need. He crossed to her. "Hey," he said. He sat down on the concrete floor so his eyes were level with hers. She looked at him immediately the way she'd looked at him since that first night in the hospital, with the attention of someone who had decided to trust and was monitoring continuously for signs that the decision was wrong. "FBI is coming," Cole said. 18 minutes. Lily's eyes moved to the door, then back to him. "He's coming back first," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." Cole held her gaze. "He is. With a lot of people. Are we going to be okay?" The question was direct and deserved a direct answer. Cole had been asked this question before in other places by people with weapons and training and years of preparation behind them, and he had never found it easy to answer honestly. "I don't know," he said, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we are. And there are 30 people in this room who are doing the same thing. Lily considered this. She looked at the rabbit in her hands, then at Reaper beside her. Is Reaper going to stay with me? She said. Reaper looked at Cole, then at Lily, then back at Lily with the steadiness of a man making a simple statement of fact. Right here, Reaper said. Not moving. Lily nodded. She reached out and took Cole's hand. Okay, she said. Cole stood and looked at Prophet, and the room understood what was coming. And the quiet that preceded it was the quiet of people who had made peace with what they were about to do. They went to the door. Outside, the sky had lightened to the pale gray of February morning. No sun yet, just the slow departure of darkness, the world becoming visible in increments. The gravel clearing in front of the garage was empty, but the sound was not empty. Sirens coming from the north and from the south, and the converging pressure that Cole had felt in other places and had learned meant that the next few minutes would determine everything that followed. The first vehicles appeared through the trees at the road's edge. Headlights, multiple. The kind of formation that communicated overwhelming force deliberately, the lights arranged to maximize the impression of numbers. Patrol cars and black SUVs pulling into the clearing in a practiced semicircle that cut off every obvious exit. Doors opening, officers emerging. 30 men in more tactical gear on some standard uniform, on others weapons drawn, or hands positioned for immediate draw. And walking through the middle of the formation, illuminated by the sweep of multiple headlights, Douglas Hale. He had changed since the garage. He was wearing body armor now, the kind that went over civilian clothes, and his weapon was visible at his hip in a way it hadn't been before. His face had gone past the blankness of controlled professionalism into something that had no good name. The expression of a man who understood that the space between where he stood in prison had narrowed to this field in these minutes and was going to resolve itself one way or the other before the sun came up. He stopped at the edge of the light. The formation stopped with him. Cole stepped onto what remained of the garage threshold. Behind him, the 30 bikers fanned out into the cold morning leather, and breath misting in the air, faces that had been shaped by hard decades into something that had stopped looking afraid of things a long time ago. Hale looked at Cole, then at the bikers, then back at Cole. Hargrove. His voice carried across the clearing with the precision of a man who had spent years making sure he was heard. This is finished. Send Lily out and surrender yourself, and I give you my word that the charges will be handled with the minimum possible severity given the circumstances. Cole said nothing. You broke multiple federal laws, Hale continued. His voice had the quality of a man delivering a verdict rather than an offer. You abducted a child from a medical facility. You've been evading federal custody for hours. None of that goes away because you have sympathetic motives. The law is the law, Hargrove, and right now it is pointing 30 weapons at you, and it is telling you that this ends here. Cole looked at the formation. 30 weapons, maybe more. The math was not ambiguous. He thought about Marcus bleeding out in the sand. The way Marcus had grabbed Cole's arm in the last minutes, and the grip had been exactly like Lily's grip in the hospital room, small and absolute and trusting in a way that didn't negotiate. Watch over my girls, brother. Cole looked at Douglas Hale. The whole world is watching, Cole said, and the lights came out of the trees. Not police lights, not the red and blue of authority. White lights, hard and specific, the lights of cameras and satellite trucks and news vehicles that had been moving through the back roads of rural Tennessee for the past 40 minutes, following the coordinates that Prophet had distributed the moment Cole had walked into Eugenia Pruitt's kitchen to make his call. Prophet had not waited, had not assumed that the FBI would arrive in time, or that 18 minutes would prove accurate, or that Hale would give them those 18 minutes to work with. Prophet had sent the location to every news outlet that had been streaming the garage confrontation, had sent it with a message that said a Memphis PD captain was about to attempt to silence a child witness in rural Tennessee, and that anyone who wanted to document it should come now. They had come. Vans from 3 Memphis stations, 1 Nashville outlet, an Arkansas affiliate that had picked up the story 2 hours ago and deployed its nearest crew. Cameras already running, already streaming operators who had driven fast on dark roads because this was the story, and they knew it, and they were not going to miss the last act. The clearing went very still. Hale stood in his body armor with 30 weapons behind him, and in front of him were cameras carrying the story live to audiences that were already numbering in the tens of thousands, climbing with the momentum of something that had caught and was not going to stop catching until it had burned through everything available to burn. The officers behind him exchanged looks, the looks of men who had signed on for a law enforcement action and were recalculating what they had actually signed on for. Some of them knew Hale, some of them had worked for Hale for years and had not asked certain questions because not asking had been the condition of advancement. Some of them were doing the moral mathematics of people who had been complicit in something they had not fully seen and were seeing it now in the light of cameras that did not lie. Hale's weapon hand twitched. One camera operator stepped forward slightly, the camera steady on his shoulder, the red light of live transmission steady and absolute. Hale stood in the sweep of headlights in the cold February morning and understood something that powerful men understood only when they had run out of room to avoid it. That the thing that had protected him for 5 years, the control of information, the management of what was visible and what remained invisible, was gone. That everything happening in this clearing was being watched by people he could not threaten and could not silence and could not make disappear. He lowered his weapon. It happened slowly, the slowness of a man making a calculation he had never expected to have to make. His hand moved down the weapon, going to his side, and then he took a step back, and then another, and the formation behind him shifted in the way of people taking their cue from the person who had brought them and watching that person recede. The sound of additional vehicles came from the eastern approach. Different sound, different kind of authority. The engine note of federal vehicles driven fast by people with a destination and a mandate. 3 black SUVs with FBI insignia broke through the tree line and pulled into the clearing, parking at angles that completed the containment without aggression positioning that said, "We are here and we are staying, and this is now our jurisdiction." Callaway Breck got out of the lead vehicle. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a windbreaker that said FBI in yellow letters, applied with the intention of being visible at a distance. His expression was the expression of a man who had spent a career arriving at situations that had already developed past the point of simple resolution and had learned to assess them quickly and act without the luxury of full information. He walked toward Cole. He looked at the formation of Memphis PD officers behind Hale, at the cameras, at the bikers in the garage doorway, at Hale who was standing in his body armor in the sweeping lights with the stillness of a man who has stopped making decisions because all the decisions have already been made without him. Captain Hale Breck said, his voice carried across the clearing with the clarity of someone who had spent years making sure the right people heard him. "You are under arrest. The charges will be read to you in full. Please surrender your weapon and place your hands behind your head." Hale looked at Breck for a moment, then at Cole, then at the cameras. He reached up slowly and unclipped his weapon and held it away from his body and set it on the hood of the nearest car and placed his hands behind his head. FBI agents moved forward. The Memphis PD officers around Hale did not intervene, some of them stepping back, some of them lowering their own weapons, with the relief of people who had been waiting for someone with more authority to arrive and take the responsibility away from them. 2 agents moved to Brett Carver's location. Cole learned this through Breck's radio, an agent's voice confirming that Carver had been located at the Memphis PD precinct and was in custody. The court order, the guardianship, the judge who signed it, all of it going into the machine that would grind through it for the next weeks and months and years. But that was later. Right now was Breck walking toward Cole, his expression recalibrating as he processed the full picture, the garage and the bikers and the cameras and the girl who was still inside. Breck stopped in front of Cole. "Ryan Hargrove," Breck said. Cole said, "Nobody's called me Ryan since my mother." Breck looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, but acknowledged the adjacency. "You have Lily Holloway. She's inside." Cole looked at the garage door. "She's been through a lot. She needs medical attention, and she needs not to be terrified by any more uniformed people for a while. Breck nodded. He turned and made a gesture, and a woman in a blue FBI windbreaker separated from the cluster of agents near the vehicles. Younger, with a face that carried the quality of someone who had specifically trained for the version of this work that involved children. Cole went back inside. Lily was where he'd left her, sitting on the blanket with Reaper beside her, the stuffed rabbit still held against her chest. She had heard everything. The stillness outside after the confrontation had communicated something, not full safety that would take longer, but the specific absence of immediate threat. She looked at Cole when he came through the door. "Is it over?" she said. "The bad part," Cole said. "Yeah." Lily looked at him for a moment, then at the door behind him, where the FBI agent was visible in the threshold. Cole sat down on the concrete floor beside her. "The FBI needs to make sure you're okay," he said. "They're going to take you somewhere safe, a hospital that doesn't know Brett Carver, and where nobody is going to tell you that you fell down the stairs." Lily looked at the female agent, assessed her the way she assessed everyone, completely and without hurry. "Will you be there?" she said to Cole. "I'll be right there," Cole said. "Every step. I promise." Lily thought about this. She looked at the rabbit in her hands, at the stuffed animal someone had bought for exactly this kind of moment, and then she reached out and put her small hand in Cole's. "Okay," she said. The drive to Nashville took 90 minutes through the gray Tennessee morning. Cole sat in the back of an FBI vehicle with Lily, who fell asleep against his arm somewhere around the 40-minute mark, with the absolute completeness of a child whose body had finally decided it was allowed to rest. He sat very still so as not to wake her and watched the winter landscape move past the tinted windows, the fields and tree lines, and the slow emergence of a sun that had decided to appear after all. Prophet rode in the vehicle behind them. Ironside and the Steel Riders had stayed at the clearing to give statements, a process that would take hours and would ultimately result in nothing actionable, because 30 veterans exercising their right to peaceful assembly in a garage in rural Tennessee, when their conduct was placed against the documented actions of Douglas Hale, made a comparison that no DA in the state was going to pursue. Callaway Breck rode in the front seat and said nothing for the first hour, which Cole recognized as professional courtesy, the restraint of a man who understood that some things needed their own time. At the hour mark, Breck turned partway in his seat. "Diane Holloway's documentation is substantial," Breck said. "We've had the flash drive for 40 minutes, and the financial forensics alone are going to take weeks to fully process." He paused. "She was thorough." "She was a professional," Cole said. "Yes." Breck was quiet for a moment. "Hale's operation goes deeper than the original 4 million. We're seeing indications of a network that's been running for longer than 5 years and involves individuals at multiple levels of the department. This is going to be a significant federal investigation." "How many people knew?" Cole said. Not a question Breck could answer definitively, but enough that it had been sustained for this long without internal exposure. Cole looked at Lily sleeping against his arm, at the bandaged arm elevated on the seat cushion, at the small face that in sleep was entirely unguarded, the face of a child without her watchfulness, which made the bruises more visible and more wrong. "She's going to need to testify eventually," Cole said. Breck's expression was careful. "At some point, yes. She is a material witness to statements made by Carver in her presence. But the forensic documentation is strong enough that her testimony, when it comes, will be corroborative rather than foundational. We're not going to build the case on a 4-year-old's memory." Cole looked at him. "We're going to build the case on Diane Holloway's work," Breck said. "Her mother was doing the right thing. We're going to make sure it counted." Cole absorbed those words and did not respond immediately. He was here now. That had to be enough to start with. Vanderbilt Children's Hospital in Nashville had been notified ahead of their arrival. They came through a side entrance to a floor that had been cleared of ambient traffic, where doctors and nurses moved with the efficiency of people who had been briefed and were ready. Lily woke when the vehicle stopped and looked around with the immediate alertness of a child whose nervous system had learned not to trust stillness. And Cole said her name quietly, and her eyes found him, and the alertness softened slightly. They took her to a private room where the lights had been adjusted to be less harsh and where the nurse who introduced herself did so by first name and crouched to Lily's eye level to do it. Cole stayed at the edge of the room and watched them work the careful hands, the quiet voices, the professional gentleness of people who understood that what Lily needed from medicine right now was not just the repair of her body. He answered questions from a doctor in the hallway, repeated what he knew about the timeline of injuries, gave Ren Voss's name as the source of the medical file on the flash drive. At some point, the exhaustion caught him. He was sitting in a chair in the hallway, and then he became aware of having been in the chair for longer than he'd intended, and that the coffee from Eugenia Pruitt's kitchen had gone cold in his hand. Breck appeared in the hallway and sat in the chair beside him. "We're filing to suspend the guardianship order immediately," Breck said. "Given Carver's arrest and the documented evidence of abuse, there's no judge in Tennessee who's going to maintain it. Lily's legal status will go into a review process." "How long?" "For the guardianship suspension days. For the full custody determination longer. CPS will need to be involved." "The real CPS," Cole said. "Not the version that suspended Ren Voss for doing her job." Breck looked at him. "Miss Voss's suspension is going to be reviewed, given the circumstances." Cole nodded. Breck was quiet for a moment. "Then you're going to file for custody?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Cole said. "You know what that process involves?" "I've started finding out," Cole said. "I've got time." Breck looked at him with the expression of a federal agent who had spent decades dealing with the outcomes of institutional failure and had learned to recognize the rare occasions when something was going to come out the other side of it reasonably intact. "For what it's worth," Breck said, "what you did tonight." He stopped. "It's worth something. Officially, I can't endorse any of it. Unofficially." He looked at the door of Lily's room. "She's alive and Hale is in federal custody, and Diane Holloway's work is going to matter. That doesn't happen without you making a decision that cost you considerably." Cole looked at the floor. "I was 7 years late," he said. Breck had no answer for that. It was simply true. But he was here now. The custody hearing was held on a Thursday in March in a Nashville courtroom that smelled like old wood and institutional coffee, 6 weeks after the night that had become something people referred to with the shorthand of a shared reference. The garage standoff, the cameras in the trees, the 4-year-old girl who had stood up and said the true thing to the man who had killed her mother. 47 news outlets had aired the footage. The viewer numbers had eventually stopped being countable in any meaningful way. Ren Voss had given 3 interviews. Eugenia Pruitt had given one brief and precise, which had become the one people remembered because she had said in it that opening her door had not been a difficult decision, that the only difficult decisions were the ones you made after you had already seen something clearly and were tempted to look away. Cole sat at the defendant's table in a suit that his lawyer had helped him select, and that fit him better than the one he'd worn to Marcus's funeral, but still carried the discomfort of formal clothing on a body shaped by years of different demands. His lawyer was a woman named Adelaide Marsh, no relation to anyone involved who specialized in family law, and had contacted Cole's public defender 2 weeks after the story broke with an offer to handle the custody petition pro bono. Her reason, stated plainly in their first meeting, was that some cases you took because the outcome mattered more than the billing rate. She sat beside him now with a folder that contained 6 weeks of documentation. Background check, clean. Employment verification. The automotive shop in East Nashville where Cole had worked for 4 years and whose owner had provided a letter describing him as reliable and skilled and someone the shop would be glad to continue employing. The 3-bedroom house in a Nashville suburb purchased 5 weeks ago, occupancy verified. The therapy sessions weekly since January with a VA-affiliated psychologist whose letter described his engagement with treatment as consistent and his progress as genuine. The parenting preparation course completed in 3 weeks. The pediatric trauma specialist who had evaluated his interactions with Lily on 3 supervised occasions and whose report used the word attuned twice. Behind Cole, the gallery was full. The bikers took up 2 rows. Ren Voss sat in the third row with her CPS credentials restored. Calloway Breck was present in a personal rather than professional capacity, which Cole had not expected, and which carried a weight he didn't examine too directly. Eugenia Pruitt had driven up from her house in the woods and was sitting in the back row in a dress that suggested she had also found formal clothing to be an imperfect fit for her actual self. Judge Harriet Denton presided. She was in her early 60s, gray hair pulled back with no pretension to anything else, eyes that had spent decades receiving information from people who wanted something and had learned to see through the wanting to the substance of what was being asked. She had reviewed the full case file, which at this point included federal filings and investigative documentation that ran to several hundred pages. She had also, Cole would learn later, watched the garage footage twice. She looked at Cole and said, "Mr. Hargrove, you are petitioning for emergency guardianship of Lily Holloway, a child to whom you have no biological or legal connection, a child you removed from a hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, in violation of a valid court order triggering federal charges which have since been suspended pending review but remain on record. Can you explain to this court what you believe entitles you to custody of this child?" Cole stood. He had prepared something with Adelaide, an organized statement that moved through the relevant points in a logical sequence that acknowledged the legal violations while contextualizing them within the documented emergency that concluded with a summary of his preparations and commitments. He had the prepared statement in his head, and he set it aside. "I don't believe anything entitles me to her," Cole said. His voice was level, and it carried in the courtroom because it was the voice of a man saying something true rather than something crafted. "I broke the law. I knew I was breaking it when I did it. I made that choice because the alternative was leaving a 4-year-old girl in the custody of the man who had been burning her with cigarettes for 6 months, and I wasn't willing to do that." He paused. "Marcus Holloway was my best friend," Cole said. "We served 3 tours together. He died in Iraq saving the lives of the men in his squad, which is who Marcus Holloway was as a person. Before his last deployment, he asked me to watch over his family if he didn't come home. He didn't come home." Cole looked at his hands for a moment, then up at the judge. "I didn't watch over them," he said. "I didn't call, didn't check in, didn't ask whether they needed anything in 7 years. Diane Holloway died, and I didn't know about it for 18 months. By the time I got to room 312 in Leon Children's Hospital, Lily had 47 cigarette burns on her back and a broken arm, and she hadn't spoken in a year and a half." The courtroom was very quiet. "I'm not asking this court to absolve me of that failure," Cole said. "I'm asking for the chance to spend the rest of my life making sure it was the last time I let her down. I bought a house, 3 bedrooms, good school district. I have a job. I've been in therapy every week. I've done everything the system says I need to do to be the kind of person who should be trusted with a child's life." He stopped. "But the honest answer to your question is that I don't know if any of that entitles me to her. What I know is that she's the daughter of the best man I've ever known, and she has nobody else, and I am not willing to be the reason she grows up believing that nobody showed up for her." Judge Denton looked at him for a long moment. Her expression gave nothing away. Then she turned to Lily. Lily was sitting in the front row between a child advocate and the pediatric trauma specialist who had been supervising her care. She was wearing a yellow dress that she had selected herself from 3 options presented to her by the foster family where she had been temporarily placed, and she was holding the stuffed rabbit from the garage. She had been told that this was a day when people would ask her questions, and that she didn't have to answer anything that felt wrong, and that Cole would be in the room the whole time. "Miss Holloway," Judge Denton said. Her voice changed when she addressed Lily, not condescending, but adjusted the way you adjusted the volume and pace of something for the person who needed to receive it most clearly. "Do you know why you're here today?" "To say where I'm going to live," Lily said. "That's right." Judge Denton looked at her steadily. "Mr. Hargrove has asked to be the person who takes care of you, to be your guardian. Do you understand what that means?" "It means he'd be like my dad," Lily said. "Except not my real dad, because my real dad died." Something moved through the courtroom at those words, not audible, just a shift in the quality of the silence. "That's right," Judge Denton said. "How do you feel about that?" Lily looked at Cole across the courtroom. The gray-green eyes direct and unhurried, the look of a child who had learned to read faces before she trusted words, running the same calculations she had run from the beginning. The continuous monitoring for signs that the decision to trust had been wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. He kept his promise, she said. Judge Denton waited. In the hospital, Lily said he promised he wouldn't let the bad man take me back. And he didn't. She paused. Even when it was really hard and everyone was trying to stop him, he didn't let go. She looked at the rabbit in her hands, then back at Cole. He could have left, she said. A lot of people left. She said this with the clarity of a child reporting something observed and verified as fact rather than emotion. But he stayed. Judge Denton was quiet for what felt like a long time. She looked at the file in front of her, at Cole, at Lily, at the gallery behind Cole where a row of men in leather jackets sat with the stillness of people who had done what they came to do and were now waiting for the world to catch up. She looked at Adelaide Marsh. The documentation of Mr. Hargrove's preparations is thorough, Judge Denton said. The psychological evaluation is substantive. The housing situation is appropriate. The employment record is stable. She paused. The circumstances under which this petition is being filed are, to say the least, unusual. The actions that led to this hearing were illegal. I want to be direct about that. The court does not endorse vigilantism regardless of motivation. Cole nodded. However, Judge Denton continued, the court also exists to serve the interests of children who cannot fully advocate for themselves. And this court has reviewed the documentation of what Lily Holloway survived under Brett Carver's guardianship and has reviewed the documentation of the institutional failures that allowed that situation to persist and is prepared to make a finding that reflects both the circumstances and the evidence. She looked at Cole. Emergency temporary guardianship is granted to Ryan Cole Hargrove, effective immediately pending a 6-month supervised review period. During that period, Mr. Hargrove will comply with weekly check-ins from a court-appointed family services monitor, continue both his own therapeutic treatment and Lily's maintain stable housing and employment, and submit to any additional evaluation the court deems necessary. She paused. At the conclusion of the review period, the court will make a determination regarding permanent guardianship based on the monitor's reports and the assessment of all relevant professionals. If Mr. Hargrove meets the conditions outlined, the court's inclination will be to approve permanent guardianship. If he does not, the court will revisit placement. She looked at Cole steadily. Do you understand the conditions? Yes, Your Honor. Do you accept them? Yes. Then take her home, Mr. Hargrove. The house was a ranch-style place on the eastern edge of Nashville, white siding that needed a coat of paint in the spring blue shutters a yard, with grass that would need attention once the weather turned. A porch with a swing that moved in the wind. A neighborhood with sidewalks and a school 3 blocks away, and neighbors who were based on Cole's limited experience of them, the kind of people who waved when they saw you. He carried Lily inside on an afternoon in early March that was cold, but carried in it the first credible suggestion that winter was not permanent. She was quiet in the way she was often quiet, not fearful silence, but observational silence, the silence of a child taking in information and filing it away. He gave her the tour. Living room with the second-hand couch he'd bought 2 weeks ago. Kitchen with the refrigerator he'd stocked that morning. The hallway. This one's yours, he said, stopping at the door at the end of the hall. She looked inside. The room was painted yellow. She had been asked through her therapist whether there was a color she liked, and she had said yellow, and Cole had spent a Saturday with a roller and a drop cloth, making the room exactly the color she described, the yellow of late afternoon and summer warm rather than harsh. The room had a bed and a dresser and a bookshelf, mostly empty, except for a few books the therapist had suggested in the stuffed rabbit from the garage, which had been cleaned and placed on the pillow. It's big, Lily said. Cole looked at the room. It was a standard bedroom, not large by any objective measure. Is it too big? He said. Lily stepped inside. She looked at the walls, at the window that looked onto the backyard, at the rabbit on the pillow. No, she said. She turned and looked at Cole in the doorway. Just right. Cole stood in the doorway of the yellow room and looked at the daughter of Marcus Holloway standing in the middle of it in her yellow dress and felt something shift in his chest that had been locked in one position for 7 years. That night she had a nightmare. He heard her through the wall, the sound of a child caught in something that wouldn't let her go. And he was on his feet and in the hallway before he was fully awake, the reflexes of a man whose body had learned that sounds in the night meant something needed his attention. He pushed her door open. She was sitting up in the bed, breathing hard, her eyes open, but not yet fully in the room. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Hey," he said quietly. "I'm here. You're okay. You're in the yellow room." She looked at him. The breathing slowed. Her eyes came back from wherever the nightmare had taken them. He stayed there until she fell back asleep, which took 20 minutes, and then he stayed a little longer because he could. The nightmares came several times a week for the first month, less often in the second. By the third month, they were weekly. Her therapist, a woman named Dr. Elaine Holt, who had been recommended by the pediatric trauma specialist at Vanderbilt, said this was the trajectory she expected and that the reduction was meaningful and that Lily was doing work in their sessions that took most adults years to attempt. In the mornings, Lily ate cereal at the kitchen counter and watched Cole make coffee with the focused attention she brought to everything. She asked questions about his job at the shop, about what different kinds of engines sounded like when they were working correctly versus when they weren't, about why the Harley in the garage made a different sound than the cars he worked on. He answered every question completely the way you answered when you understood that a child asking questions was a child who had decided the world was worth knowing about. Prophet came on Sundays. He arrived at 10 in the morning with groceries and terrible jokes and a patience with Lily's questions that seemed to have no bottom. She called him Prophet from the first visit with the acceptance of a child who had understood that some names didn't require explanation. Ironside brought his granddaughter, a 7-year-old named B, for play dates that started formal and gradually over several weeks became the loud and chaotic thing that play dates were supposed to be. Lily laughed at something B said one afternoon in the backyard, a genuine laugh that surprised both of them, and Cole heard it from the kitchen and stood at the window for a moment just to make sure it was real. It was real. Brett Carver was convicted on 11 counts, including child abuse and conspiracy to commit murder. The sentencing hearing produced 35 years without the possibility of parole. Cole did not attend. Douglas Hale's trial lasted 4 weeks and resulted in convictions on federal charges, including conspiracy murder for hire, obstruction of justice, and wire fraud. The sentencing was 40 years. 6 other Memphis PD officers entered plea agreements. The forensic accounting work that Diane Holloway had done formed the evidentiary foundation of the prosecution's case. Her work reconstructed and verified by 3 independent experts who each described it in their testimony as exceptionally thorough. Cole read the coverage and then set it aside. The 6-month review concluded in September. The court-appointed monitor's report was 12 pages and concluded with a recommendation for permanent guardianship. Dr. Holt's letter was 4 pages and said, among other things, that the relationship between Cole Hargrove and Lily Holloway was one of the more functional therapeutic environments she had observed in her professional career. Notable particularly for its consistency and for what she described as the guardian's capacity to be present without requiring the child to manage his emotions alongside her own. Judge Denton signed the permanent guardianship order on a Tuesday afternoon. Adelaide Marsh called Cole at the shop to tell him. He was underneath a 2009 F-150 with an exhaust problem when his phone buzzed and he slid out from under the truck and looked at the screen and then sat on the concrete floor of the bay for a moment before he called her back. That evening, he told Lily. She was at the kitchen counter doing homework, which she approached with the same focused attention she brought to everything. She looked up when he said her name. "The judge signed the papers today," Cole said. "The permanent ones." Lily looked at him. She set down her pencil. "So I'm staying," she said. "Yeah," Cole said. "You're staying." Lily was quiet for a moment. She looked at her homework, then at Cole. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to the problem she'd been working on. I know, she said. 5 years later, on a Saturday in June, that was everything. February hadn't been warm and green and full of the generosity of Southern summer. Lily Holloway came home from the last day of third grade, carrying a certificate and a piece of folded paper, and the energy of a child who had just completed something. She was 9 years old, and she looked like Marcus in the way that children look like the parents they'd never known. Not specific features, so much as a quality of presence. The attentiveness, the steadiness that Marcus had carried in places where steadiness was the only thing keeping people together. She also looked like herself, like Lily, like someone who had survived something and been shaped by it without being only that shape. Cole was on the porch when she came up the walk. He had coffee. He had the ease of a man who had over 5 years learned that Saturdays were for being in one place without apology. She held up the certificate. Top of her class. He looked at it properly, not the quick acknowledgement of a distracted adult, but the full attention it had earned. You did the work, he said. She shrugged in the way of a 9-year-old receiving a compliment, the combination of pleasure and deflection that was its own language. She unfolded the paper. It was a drawing crayon on lined paper, the kind of thing that belonged on a refrigerator or in a box that would be found 30 years from now when someone was cleaning out a house and stopped at this particular piece of paper and had to sit down for a moment. Cole in the center, tall and recognizable even in crayon. Lily beside him, smaller, her yellow dress rendered in the correct yellow. Around them, a circle of figures in leather jackets, the brotherhood rendered in the way children rendered things they loved. Not accurate, but true. Mrs. Patterson said to draw our families, Lily said. She handed it to him. Cole looked at it for a long moment. Family's the people who show up, Lily said. That's what she told us. Yeah, Cole said. That's right. The sound came from down the street before the bikes were visible. The rumble of Harleys moving in formation, the sound Cole had been hearing for enough years that it registered somewhere below conscious thought. The way certain sounds registered when they'd been part of the background of your life long enough to become the background itself. Prophet's bike came around the corner first, then Reaper's, then Ironside and 6 others riding loose and easy on a Saturday afternoon that had no purpose except to be the kind of day that was worth having. Lily stood up from the porch step. She waved. The bike slowed slightly as they passed. Prophet lifted 2 fingers from the handlebar in the gesture that meant acknowledgement and something more than acknowledgement, the gesture of a man recognizing a person who mattered. The others followed. Leather and chrome moving through the June afternoon, the sound fading gradually down the street and then gone. Lily watched until they turned the corner. Then she sat back down on the step with the drawing in her lap and looked at it for a moment without speaking. Cole sat beside her. She had a nightmare 2 nights ago and had stood in his doorway at 3 a.m. and said his name, and he had been awake already because he often was the old machinery of hypervigilance that had never fully dismantled itself, but had been redirected towards something more useful. He had gotten up and they had sat in the kitchen and he had made her warm milk because that was what the therapist had suggested years ago. And it had simply become the thing they did. And they had sat at the kitchen counter in the 3 a.m. quiet until the nightmare had receded far enough for sleep to be possible again. Some nights were still hard. Some mornings arrived still carrying what the night had held. This was the trajectory, Dr. Holt said, not the absence of difficulty, but the growing capacity to move through it, the accumulating evidence that difficulty was not permanent even when it felt that way. Cole understood this from his own experience. The VA sessions that he still attended less frequently, now the nightmares that came, but less completely, the way the weight of Fallujah had not disappeared, but had been redistributed across a life that had more in it now than it had in the years of riding and drinking and outrunning everything that had his name on it. You couldn't outrun the things that were yours to carry, but you could, it turned out, carry them differently, with company, with purpose, with a 9-year-old girl who asked questions about engines and did her homework at the kitchen counter and drew her family in crayon and had decided somewhere in the first months of the yellow room and the Sunday groceries and the 3 a.m. warm milk that the world was worth being in. Douglas Hale died in federal prison in the third year of his sentence. Cole read the brief news item and felt nothing in particular, which was Dr. Holt had once told him a legitimate response to the death of someone who had done harm. The absence of feeling was not the absence of having processed the thing. Sometimes the processing produced not feeling, but the clarity of something finished. Brett Carver was in a maximum security facility in western Tennessee and would be there for the next 30 years at minimum. Cole had not thought about him in months. Ren Voss had been reinstated to CPS with a formal apology from the state of Tennessee that was, by her own description in the single interview she gave about it, approximately 25% of adequate. She had been promoted twice. She still called Cole on Lily's birthday not to check in on Lily's situation, but because she had become in the way of people who had been through something together, a person in their lives. Eugenia Pruitt had come to Nashville twice. Once for Lily's birthday in the first year, driving 3 hours in her rusted pickup with a chocolate cake she said she had made from scratch, which Lily had eaten 2 pieces of and declared the best thing she'd ever tasted. The second time was for the permanent guardianship signing, which Adelaide Marsh had organized a small gathering to mark nothing formal. Just the people who had been part of it in one way or another gathered in Adelaide's conference room with coffee and the shared acknowledgement that didn't require speeches. Eugenia Pruitt had brought another cake. Lily had eaten 2 pieces again. Now on the Saturday porch in the June afternoon, Lily looked at her drawing and then folded it carefully along its original creases and held it. "Can we put it on the refrigerator?" she said. Cole looked at the drawing, at the crayon figures in leather jackets, at the 2 figures in the center, one tall and one small, rendered in the way that made them recognizable as themselves rather than as generic people. "Yeah," he said, "we can do that." They went inside together, the screen door closing behind them with the sound of a summer afternoon continuing in the way summer afternoons did when they were the ordinary kind, the kind that accumulated into years and became what a life was made of, the unremarkable Saturdays that were in their accumulation, the whole of it. Cole pinned the drawing to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like Tennessee that had been there when he bought the house and that he had never replaced because there had never been a reason to. Lily looked at it on the refrigerator, then at Cole. "Good," she said. Outside Nashville moved through its Saturday afternoon. The neighborhood did the things neighborhoods did, children on sidewalks, someone mowing 2 yards over the occasional car, moving without urgency through the familiar streets. Ordinary. Continuous. The abundant ordinariness that was only visible when you had seen what it looked like when it was gone. Marcus Holloway had died in a sandy place far from here, trusting that the people he loved would be looked after. He had been right to trust. Eventually. Cole stood in his kitchen in the June afternoon and looked at a crayon drawing on his refrigerator that said, in the language available to 9-year-olds, everything that needed to be said. Through the screen door, the summer light lay across the porch, and the yard and the street beyond it, warm and unhurried, the light of a day that was simply itself, requiring nothing except to be present in it. That was enough. It was everything.